Welcome in, Braves Today, bravestoday.com, all brought to you by Plains Coffee. Go to plainscoffee.com, use the promo code BRAVES, get your 10% off. We'll talk more about that momentarily as we'll run you through some of the flavors and how you can get it delivered to your door. He's Lindsay Crosby. I'm Ben Taylor, and we're just going to talk battery today. How about that?
And not the battery Atlanta, but
right,
the pitching battery. Yeah.
exactly. Just talk about that a little bit, and not necessarily in a bad way, because it seems like every time we have a pitching discussion, it goes down the wrong road of us not having any. This time we're going to lean on the All-Star, and that is the guy that's the 20-game winner, and Spencer Strider. And Lindsay, you've got an article up right now, and it talks about him coming forward and saying he needs to add pitching, not necessarily people like us going, why don't you add another pitch? But he has a very good reason behind it, and that's because he feels like he's kind of maxed out on one of his pitches already.
Yeah. So, I mean, Spencer Strider is 90% fastball slider. And the common thought process behind that is you can't survive with just two pitches. And Strider's a bit unique because they're both some of the best two pitches in all of baseball, right? It's like one of the best fastballs, one of the best sliders. And he was talking at Braves Fest about adding new pitches. And he discussed the fact that the changeup, he has gotten the changeup to as good as it's going to be, just based on the way that his body works. And in pitching, they call this motor preferences, like your natural movement patterns of your body. Because the way Strider works, he just can't get anything else out of the changeup. The changeup is what it is. And so I kind of dove a little bit into some comments, not only from Braves Fest, but from other times he's discussed pitching, talked to some pitching experts around the league to try to figure out, okay, so when he does add something, and I'm of the opinion it's going to be sooner rather than later, what could it be? And, kind of looked at, is it a two-seam fastball? Is it a sweeper? Is it a splitter? I think there's a couple options in there, but you're at this weird point now with Spencer Strider where the two pitches work well enough, right? You've seen individual situations where the command hasn't always been there of one of them, or a team has had a really good game plan. I'm thinking back to the NLDS against the Phillies where they were kind of sitting slider and just fouling off fastballs. But for the most part, those two pitches have been good enough for him to lead the league in strikeouts and be a Cy Young candidate. But as pitchers age, usually you lose some velocity as you, not guaranteed, not for sure, but he's even admitted that part of the reason these two pitches work is because of his velocity. And so as some of that velocity naturally ticks down a little bit, or he has to put more effort into getting it, he's going to have to add something. And I think there's a couple different really interesting ideas that he could do. And so that's what the article's about. It's honestly, like, I write a lot of stuff for Braves Today. I'm a managing editor. It's kind of my job.
Yep.
But this is one of the ones that I'm actually really proud of because it started off, I wanted to talk about his comments about adding a new pitch. And it just became, 1,400 words about pitching philosophy and logistics and body movements and all kind of stuff. But I feel like it's still digestible and easy to understand. So I'm kind of proud of it.
No, I like it because here's you mentioned the percentages a while ago about him, how many fastballs he's got or he throws compared to his sliders. And the one thing where he is really dominant is when he gets the run support. And John Smoltz said it best last year. It's awesome when you can put a 3 or a 4 spot on the board for Spencer Strider because he can just rear back, throw all fastballs from the waist up because people just can't seem to catch up to him, get to the 7th inning, and get out of there. And so he doesn't need a third pitch. He rarely needs that second one when he's got a 3 or 4 run lead because he can throw the fastball with ease and he can keep it 95 plus above the waist. And it's just tough for guys to be able to turn on and do anything with.
He actually specifically mentioned that. He said, even if they're sitting on the fastball up, the brain can't process 98 miles an hour with 20 vertical inches of movement and still be on time every time and get the barrel to the ball. Like he talked about, if he can elevate the fastball, even if they know it's coming, they can't get to it on time to get a hit. And some of that is the movement that he gets. Some of that is the velocity. And like John Smoltz said, like that works. But at the same time, like we have to acknowledge, for the most part, you don't hold that exceptional velocity all the way into your 30s. Like he's going to have to do something eventually. But right now, it's good enough. And so I think the thing is, like, you don't necessarily have to add something. But Spencer Strider is also a pitching nerd, right?
Yep.
He dives into all of the... I mean, he in essence built both of these pitches in a pitching lab to make them so effective. And so I guarantee you he's thinking ahead as to what do I need to do in the future.
And as you said a while ago, it could be a second fastball. It could be he could just because everything looks the same, motion's just the same. He's just going to grip it a little different. It's going to see a little different movement, which would also completely bewilder hitters because they think that they're getting one thing and they're getting another. They're still getting it at 96, 97, 98 miles an hour, which is going to be tough to catch up. If you had to guess if you had to switch right now, if they said, all right, you've got to have a third pitch that's not a changeup, what would you think it would? Would you think he'd stay with a fastball and go, with a two-seamer or something of that nature?
I think he would go for something. He'd want some different movement and a different velocity band. And on Locked On MLB Prospects, I talk about that a lot, about how many velocity bands and directions you can cover. And so I think if you add something like a sweeper, a significantly horizontally breaking slider, usually it's in the low 80s. It's got, a foot and a half of glove side movement. And then you tweak the existing slider to be a little bit more vertical than it is now. Because now it drops, but it also kind of darts down and away from a righty. And so I think if you add a sweeper that's just going to run away from them, you tweak the slider to the existing slider, the gyro slider, to drop a little bit more. And that gives you a high 90s pitch, that gives you a high 80s pitch, and a low to medium 80s pitch. And it gives you 3 different directions for movement as far as up, down, and then straight horizontally. And the good thing is the way that his body motions already work, it shouldn't be that hard to add a sweeper. Right. Guys like him that backspin really well, that don't supinate well, you can really kind of grip and rip a sweeper pretty quickly. I'm confident that if Spencer Strider decided today that he wanted to throw a sweeper this year, he could have a not only a competitive but an above average MLB sweeper by opening day, just because it works really well with his existing movement patterns.
Can you imagine being a righty though, and that sweeper, you're thinking that 98's coming at your hands, and all of a sudden it sweeps away from you and catches the corner, or you just got to try to throw a bat out there to try to grab something to see if you know what I mean. Yeah. and it's even worse for a lefty because you'd give up on it. You'd think it'd be in the right-hander's batter's box, and then if he ends up throwing it where he can get it over for an actual strike, that would be dangerous because that sweeper, the sweeper moves faster than the breaking ball. That's the thing, is when they're throwing it in on those righties, it's coming in on them looking like it's a fastball till they find, and by the time you see the spin on it, it's too late. It's by you. And it's by you on the outside corner, and you're just, as I said, you're just waving at it, trying to hope that you get a piece of it.
Yeah, and the one reason why I hesitate a little bit on a sweeper is the fact that he doesn't really have platoon splits, and the sweeper, because it's such extreme movement one direction horizontally, it does have the worst platoon splits of any individual breaking pitch, right? It's something where, unless you're really comfortable as a right-handed pitcher, unless you're really comfortable with throwing it and landing it inside to a lefty, it's something where it is much better against a guy of the same handedness versus the opposite. And that was a point, somebody I talked to, Lance Brodowski, works for Marquee Network, who broadcasts the Cubs, as a pitching analyst. And I reached out to him. We had a great conversation before I put the piece up. And he kind of made that same point. He's like, well, I think it's not so much what works best for his movement patterns. It's what is the purpose of the new pitch, right? It's something where he doesn't really have a platoon split, so he doesn't need to add a sweeper just to help with righties because he can already get righties, right? And so now it becomes does he want something to get a velocity difference? That's not a changeup, because if he does, that's what the sweeper would do. If it's something where, depending on what he wants to do, could dictate what he adds. Does he add a splitter? Does he add a two-seamer? Because if he wants the movement, if he wants the arm side movement, that's the two-seamer, right? If he wants the velocity difference, that could be the sweeper. If he wants something that will drop vertically and look like a fastball out of the hand, that would be the splitter. And so it's kind of back to, what does he want to do? I just think that given what he naturally does well, the sweeper could be something he could add rather quickly. Yeah, like I said, you could see it on opening day, or he's probably going to start game 2, I guess. Max Fried will be game 1.
Yeah.
We don't have an opening day starter yet, but you could see it on game 2 or opening day, whichever one he starts, if he were to decide today to do it. And I just think that's why I would lean to sweeper if I had to put money on it.
Braves fans, stay tuned. We shall see when we see the pitch debut, if it's going to be on opening day or at least the next day, depending on who they announce is going to be the starters. Brought to you by Plains Coffee. Go to plainscoffee.com. Use the promo code BRAVES to get your 10% off straight to your doorstep. Roast the beans until you have your order ready. Every order roasted and shipped same day. Ship fresh roasted coffee to customers around the world. Experience the goodness and freshly roasted coffee beans delivered to your doorstep, like the chocolate hazelnut, the turtle, the Cinnabon, the cinnamon hazelnut, caramel, as well as chocolate hazelnut, even mocha, and yes, for all of you freaks in the fall, the pumpkin spice as well. You can go to plainscoffee.com, promo code BRAVES to get your 10% off. Move from the mound to behind the plate. You did another article, and I thought this was very interesting because we talked about what a hero was in the first half and how things started headed south for him in the second half, at least from the plate. The arm was always there. But that is Sean Murphy, and this may explain a lot for the second half woes because apparently he dealt with the heat a little more than he probably thought he would do coming from the West Coast.
Yeah, and you know, at Braves Fest last weekend, he admitted that he learned a lot in his first summer. He had never played every day in that kind of heat, and so like it definitely affected him. And we've talked about how he was incredibly hot in the first half, was an all-star starter, and then fell off in the back half. And we were kind of attributing some of that to that mild little hamstring strain that he had late in the year. But if you look at the overall stats, 306, 400, 599 with 17 homers in the first half. And then in the second half, 159, 310, 275 with 8 total extra base hits in the second half. And if you match that to the weather, right? June 17th through the end of October, the average daily high in Oakland, where he played the first 4 years, was 71 degrees. And the humidity was usually below 50%, right? In Atlanta, during that time period, the average daily high is 88 degrees, and the humidity caps out at 86%. And for a bigger, like physically bigger guy who's strapping on hard plastic stuff, squatting down, popping up, throwing all of that for multiple hours, like it is rough. It is hard to understand that. And like, he wasn't the only one that was bothered by it. Max Fried buzzed his hair when he came back in August because he hadn't had a chance to pitch all summer and acclimate to the heat. So like, it's a real thing. And he admitted it bothered him more than he expected. It kind of reminds me, I mentioned this in the article, it reminds me of how Brian Snitker at the winter meetings, we were talking to Brian Snitker about the rotation and Bryce Elder, and he mentioned that you never know how hard it's going to be until you do it, right? Bryce Elder had a full season in MLB. He didn't realize physically how tough that was going to be, and he changed his preparation to be more effective and to withstand the workload of a full season. I feel like Murphy's in that same boat, right? He didn't know and wasn't aware of how much the heat was going to just sap the energy out of you. But now that he's had a full off season to 1, recover from it, 2, expect it, and 3, work on whatever he needs to work on, whether it's hydration, conditioning, whatever, it feels like he's going to do better with that in 2024, right?
Listen, I've grown up in the Southeast.
Same.
Never lived outside the Southeast.
Same.
Me playing golf on a Saturday is not near as taxing as him catching 100+ games in a season with full gear on in the heat of the summer. And people like me still get drained. You still get drained when we're outside doing yard work. I can only imagine competition play. Like it finally, that, as they call it, the old refrigerator jumped on his back in the second half. And he didn't get a rest. I mean, with him being an all-star too, I mean, he didn't take any time off in the middle of the season. And so he also, and at one point in time, Lindsay, if you remember us discussing this, he even made the comment, I think it needs to get to a point where I'm playing more days in a row so I can get in more of a groove. He said that during the season. Little did he realize he was probably actually hurting himself from a physical standpoint by doing that in, 90+% humidity in the middle of the summer, and 88 degrees as opposed to 71 degrees. And so it probably didn't clue into him until he saw maybe some issues that Elder dealt with, and maybe some of the other players said, hey man, you realize that you're catching a lot of games and you're doing it in the heat. Like, this is not normal. So there's a reason you need a good backup. And Sean Murphy needed a little bit of help, it seems like, last year, because those numbers are just astounding to me, how he went from the first half, when you put it to pen to paper like you did, and it shows his line, you're just sitting there going, wow, it really was bad in the second half. And it kind of wakes you up and goes, something's got to change in the 2024 season.
Yeah, and I think some of that's going to be maybe a little better health from Travis d'Arnaud. I think that when he played, in essence, almost every single game for a month while Travis was out earlier in the year, that's something where, thank goodness that didn't happen in July or August, right? It happened earlier in the year, but that's still something where if you're trying to maybe pace yourself, you're trying to, understand how much energy you need to get through a season, get through a month or whatever, and all of a sudden you have to go start 28 to 29 games behind the plate. I feel like that could definitely impact things down the road, and you may not think of it. And I'm thinking about some of the guys we've talked to on the pod coming back and just mentioning about, you get to, like, I'm thinking pitchers, like you get back to August or September and your cutter just isn't cutting the same way. Your slider just isn't breaking the same way. And it's because you're fatigued, and your body's fatigued, your arm's fatigued, and it's not enough for you to consciously say, I don't have it, but you just notice the difference. It feels like that was at first part of it, right? Was him realizing something's not right here. Like, I'm just not, I don't quite have it.
Yep.
And it's more time to think about it. You're like, it's definitely the heat. And so hopefully this year is better. I just feel like we saw Matt Olson have a different first year from his second year. He didn't talk about this, but it's very likely he also dealt with issues with the heat and things like that. First base isn't as physically demanding, but he also didn't take days off. So I am high. Stock is up for me on Sean Murphy in 2024.
Yeah, you mentioned the Olsen thing. I'm still not so sure when it got playoff time that it still didn't affect him a little bit this last year. It seemed like the bat slowed down a little bit, and that's all of them. I mean, they need to hopefully there's a big enough lead they can take more days off. They got the depth. They've got room for more depth as well that could come before it's all said and done with. So I told you we'd talk battery. I want to tease it a little bit as we'll talk prospects next time around when Lindsay and I visit. And the reason being, because we mentioned Sean Murphy and catching. Do we have the next Brian McCann that may be sitting in the system? We shall find out, as Lindsay will either have me very positively looking forward to the future behind the plate, or he will diminish my dreams by telling me that it's all for nothing and we will be using him to trade him off a little bit later on. It's all brought to you by Plains Coffee, plainscoffee.com. Promo code BRAVES to get your 10% off. He's Lindsay Crosby. I'm Ben Taylor. All of the information can be found at bravestoday.com. Lindsay, thank you, bud.
Thanks.